Good Shabbos. The kingdom of the Jewish people is from the tribe of Yehuda, Judea. Why? He wasn't the firstborn, he wasn't the second, he wasn't the third. He was the fourth son of Leah. And yet, we know the kingdom of King David, of the leaders of the Jewish people, even in time of exile, of the heads of the Sanhedrin, and of Mashiach himself, all must come from Yehuda. What is it about Yehuda that represents royalty and leadership to that extent? Well, the answer is very clear in our portion. When Yosef chooses to give his brothers a hard time, and he makes them bring Benjamin, and he puts his goblet in the sack of Benjamin, and then of course Benjamin is caught, and they're all brought back, and Joseph says that Benjamin will remain my slave, and you go up to your father. And there's at this moment that we see Yehuda step forward, and he says, I took responsibility. I was the guarantor for Benjamin. Allow him to go up to his father, and I'll stay here and be in his place a slave instead of him. Wow. Where does one get the strength of character to put himself at peril for the benefit of his brother? The answer is because he took responsibility. But yes, why did he take responsibility? Rather, everyone else was hungry. Everyone else needed food, also needed to go down to Egypt. Why was it Yehuda who stepped forward? Because that's the quality of leadership that is represented by Yehuda and his tribe from there on in. The care. And the ones who don't say, it's none of my business, or the ones who might moan and groan and say, oy, nebach, shame, what can we do? But those who step forward and say, I will do whatever I can to help a person, to help other people, to help a community, to help a society. You don't just step back and say, it's nothing to me. I can't solve everyone's problems. That's not what Yehuda teaches us. That's what leadership is. That's what kingship is. And that's really what we're meant to learn from it. That each one of us in our lives have opportunities of stepping forward and making a difference in other people's lives. And when those opportunities arise, then we must do our part. Because essentially this idea of arvus, that we're responsible for one another, is not only we're all from the tribe of Yehuda, basically. Most of us are from the tribe of Yehuda. And that is what our DNA is all about. The care for another. This is expressed incredibly in the following distinction and difference there is between Israel and I think most other places in the world. There was this terrible story in America a few months ago where this fellow immigrant raped a woman on a train for 40 minutes. And there was a full train. There was people around there. They didn't do anything. They didn't call for help. They did nothing. They videoed it. How does that happen? And you know what? It's not illegal. None of them did anything illegal. Someone can fall down on the floor holding his heart, my heart, help, on Fifth Avenue, and no one has an obligation to do anything. I know when studying first aid, one of the rules they tell you clearly is if you haven't started to help, you have no obligation in helping. In Israel, even today, there's the law of loy samed al dam reyacha, do not stand idly by and your brother's blood is being spilled. If you see an event in the street and you're able to do something to help it, whether it be a health issue or attack or whatever it is, and you don't, you can actually be imprisoned for a year. Because in Israel, we know that we are responsible for each other. And we do care for one another. We are from Yehuda, Judea. That's who we are. I once related a story. This fellow was sitting with a great rabbi of Ger, the Pnei Menachem, and they were speaking about the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he says, in the late 1940s, I moved to New Zealand. I took off my Hasidic garb, and I was involved in textiles, so I would get good wool from the sheep in New Zealand. Anyway, my daughter lived in New York, Brooklyn, and I went to visit her once. And as I go into the elevator, to a lift, I see this distinguished young man, and he shakes my hand, and he says, "Where does a Jew come from?" And I say, "From New Zealand." So he says to me, "Is there a mikveh in New Zealand?" I said, "I don't know. I'm just here on business, a little bit, time, not here permanently." Says, a Jew must make sure that wherever he is, the spiritual needs of that place are actually taken care of. He goes off the elevator. My daughter says, "You know what that is? That's the son-in-law of the Lubavitcher Rebbe." This is 1940s, the previous Rebbe's time. In other words, the Rebbe. In 1989, he moved back to Israel. He put back his Hasidic garb. He was part of the Gera community. And his daughter comes to visit his daughter again. And his daughter says, "Let's go. You should go and see the Rebbe and get $1 from him on a Sunday morning." And so he does. He goes by the Rebbe. And he was thinking he'd get $1 and move on. The Rebbe gives him $1 and looks at him and says, "No. So is there a mikveh yet in New Zealand?" So he's telling the Pnei Menachem, the Gera Rebbe, "Wow, like I look different than I was in plain clothes, and now I'm dressed as a Gera Chassid, much older. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people have passed by the Rebbe in that time. And this is 40 years later. And he remembers me? Wow." So Pnei Menachem says, the fact that he remembers you, it's no big deal. Because he saw you on a soul level. So that soul, this soul, it's the same soul. What's a big deal for me is that he cares that there's a mikveh in New Zealand. And that's what we learn from Yehuda. If there's a problem, if there's an issue, if there's a vexing issue facing the community, facing a friend of yours, facing someone you know, go out there and do what you can and step up, because that's what makes us who we are as Jews from Judah. That's our responsibility. Good Shabbos.